Good morning. I almost feel a bit ashamed starting a conference that is all about innovation with a story from the past. But on the other hand, it's about art, it's about traveling with art, it's about creating, it's about insurance, it's about struggle. So I guess I'm okay. I will try to keep it short. It will be a bit shorter than the 45 minutes that is in your schedule. I'll start with the story of the amazing loan of the Milkmaid to the US before the Second World War, which started as a normal loan that was supposed to take 5.5 months approximately, but in the end it took longer than the entire war. This is the Milkmaid as it is normally being seen. It's a very popular painting, and strange enough, it seldom travels, and I'll tell you why that is. I joined the museum a long time ago, and my first task was to streamline the traffic of paintings both in and out, and the first incoming loan were huge paintings from the Prado Museum in Madrid, and the first outgoing loan were a few enormous militia pieces to the Frans Hals Museum in Haarlem. And during one of the many coffee breaks in the paintings department, I sighed and said, well, all these enormous paintings, why don't we just lend a Vermeer or something? You can feel it, a very painful silence fell, and the head of the paintings department looked at me, and he had this dark brown voice, and he said, "The Rijksmuseum never lends a Vermeer." I was 26, and I realized that I had said something completely out of order. It was only like 6 or 8 months later that I heard the story behind this. In 1971, during a loan to Brussels, one of the Vermeer paintings was stolen. It was taken out of its frame. Finally, it was the canvas was cut from the stretcher, and after 14 days, it was found back under the bed of the thief. Here you see how it came back and how the restoration went. It's the love letter. We have 4 Vermeers on display normally in the Rijksmuseum, and this was what happened to this painting. And this was one of the reasons why decades after this occasion, paintings by Vermeer were not allowed to travel. Even apart from this horrible event, lending a Vermeer has always been a difficult decision. Paintings by Johannes Vermeer are rare and precious. It is known that Johannes Vermeer painted in an extremely precise and attentive way, which made his paintings expensive. And as a Roman Catholic in a Protestant city, it was perhaps very difficult for him to find customers. Troubled with the constant lack of money, as a responsible parent of 11 children, he died at the age of 43. His total production of paintings, therefore, probably never exceeded the number of 50. Around 35 Vermeers are known today. 4 of them, as I said, are in the collection of the Rijksmuseum. But, well, the trauma went to the past, and in 2001, I think that was the first occasion when we started to lend Vermeers again. So nowadays they go around. In 2001 I brought it to London. 10 years ago it went to the Metropolitan Museum in New York. In 2017 it was in the Louvre, and in 2018 it went to Tokyo. Art does travel, as you more than anybody else know. It travels in order to bring it under the attention of new audiences, but sometimes also for political reasons. Countries can demonstrate their power with art or their wealth It can be used to make new friends or to persuade parties to do business with us. Concerning the Milkmaid, a recent trip to Asia brought in a whole new element. Function followed fashion when Louis Vuitton offered to design and make a crate to allow this painting to travel in style. Old master paintings, we don't realize it always, but old master paintings are becoming celebrities. So either they travel completely anonymous, and if that's not possible, they travel with all the necessary bling. Note how the crate is standing on the foreground, and the painting, which was once the cause of all this, is pushed to the background as a sort of decor piece. I think, although, that the Milkmaid deserves this luxury, especially after harsh travel experiences from the past. Today's story started as a completely normal loan, as I said. The Milkmaid, together with 5 other paintings from the Rijksmuseum, crossed the ocean in April 1939 in order to give an international audience an impression of Dutch art. The loan period was meant to go on for 186 days, but eventually lasted 7 years. Look at this compact and very efficient way to bring the message that we, the Rijksmuseum, were willing to lend 6 paintings. Radiograms or telegrams were paid for by the word, so the message was kept short. No, my dearest professor, or best regards, or yours sincerely, or whatever, or all that expensive nonsense. From mentioning the Vermeer apart from the 5 other works, you can tell that lending this particular painting had not been an easy decision. Also note that the date on the telegram is the 7th of March, 1939, and that is a rather late moment to decide about lending when the exhibition was to open the 1st of May. So from all that you can tell that it was not easy to decide this. The loan even reached the national press. And you probably can't read Dutch, or you can't see it, but it's the same. It's always the same. It's about priceless art. And here in one sentence it says that it's a painting of inestimable value. And in the same sentence they say that it's worth $1,000 per square inch. And when I read these things, I always get out the calculator, and I've checked it. And if you look at the insurance value, then in fact the price per square inch was $1,274. But what was the occasion? The occasion was the World Exhibition of 1939. The Queen's Museum of Art in Flushing Meadows, Corona Park, New York, is now housed in the only building that remains from the World Exhibition of 1939. Built as the New York City building on the Expo, it formed a rather conservative center amidst the spectacular futuristic architecture of the World Fair. Although the building has been modernized, it has a new glass facade, you can still see what it looked like, and you can still recognize the original architecture. It served for 4 years, after the closing of the Expo, it served for 4 years as the temporary location for the United Nations General Assembly. And in 1964, it once again was the middle of another World Expo, the 1964 World's Fair. Building the World of Tomorrow was the subtitle for the 25th edition in 1939 of the Universal World Exhibition. The globe and the giant toothpick, referred to as the Perisphere and Skylon, became the symbols of this modernistic expo. The aim of the expo was to show what had recently been achieved economically, socially, technically, and in culture. There were a few innovations that were shown here for the first time. I was on one of the excursions yesterday in the storage of the Film Museum, and we saw black and white film material that was colored in order to make it more attractive. The 1939 World's Fair was the first moment when modern color film material was presented. And it was also the start of television and air conditioning. General Motors presented the Futurama, a giant maquette in which the visitor could get a glimpse of housing and transport as it was expected to look in 1960. You could really look into the future. Buttons like these were the latest craze at that moment, so there are many buttons still reminding us of the 1939 World Expo. Sometimes with a message, like I've seen the future, sometimes in material. Bakelite, now also available in light blue, no longer only in brown and black, was also a new thing that, at that time. A glance of the future, who wouldn't like that? Of course, it was an idealized vision of the future. The sky was not all that clear. Among the numerous buttons, there were examples that were pointing towards a somewhat different future. Quickly back to the art then. On the expo, there was a relatively small building. You see it here. This is what is now the Queen's Museum. And in this building, I have a photograph there. That was the place where an exhibition was organized that was to tell the story of European art between 1300 and 1800 in no less than 500 paintings and 50 pieces of sculpture. Dr. Wilhelm Valentiner was an American art historian from German origin. Before becoming director of the Detroit Museum of Art, the later Detroit Institute of Arts, he studied both in Germany as in the Netherlands. That made him the right person to organize this enormous exhibition and seek cooperation from lenders. Already in 1938, he visited Amsterdam in order to gain support for his project. As I said, it took until less than 2 months before the opening to get a final approval. From what I read about him, I get the impression of a friendly, polite, but somewhat nervous man, and how he must have suffered from slow responders at the Rijksmuseum. But eventually the ship that brought the paintings to America left the port of Rotterdam on April 22nd and arrived on April 28th. That is 3 days before the opening. Here, come on. Here the tool stops. Okay, thank you. Here we see a type of crate that was common in those days. Even when I joined the museum, they were still in use. Very nice brass nails all around that would come loose every now and then travel through the crate. They are okay, but no glimpse of Louis Vuitton here. On this particular loan, even having a crate of your own wasn't a luxury that was affordable. On the bill, on the right, we see that there were 2 crates for 6 paintings and that they were brought from the Rijksmuseum to the port of Rotterdam for the amount of 30 guilders. The art crates may not have been luxurious. The surroundings for the courier certainly were. The SS New Amsterdam from the Holland-America line was launched a year earlier to optimize a passage between the Netherlands and New York. It was considered to be the most luxurious means of travel between the 2 continents at the time. In the correspondence about this shipment, we find that the shipping company arranged 2 communicating cabins fitted with all the necessary locks and bolts. But at the same time, they made it very clear that the Holland-America line would not take any responsibility for such a precious cargo. So special vigilance was arranged. So far, so good. Both the art exhibition and the World's Fair were a tremendous success. Wikipedia tries to tell me that 45 million visitors visited the fair, but I don't believe that, 45 million, that's way too many. But anyhow, it did what it had to do, and so did the art exhibition. In the meantime, in Europe, the situation became threatening. Already in May, so just after the paintings had left, Holland went into pre-mobilization, which meant that safety precautions were made and new rules applied. In the correspondence concerning the loan of that month, we find once again mentioned that the loans must be sent back immediately after the closing of the exhibition, which is normal procedure, I think, so I was a bit surprised about that, but it was once underlined. But by September, the situation had gotten a lot worse. After the Anschluss of Austria in 1938, the Germans had now incorporated Sudetenland and were heading towards Poland. In the Netherlands, preparations for an armed conflict were made. The Rijksmuseum closed and started to evacuate most of its collections. Here you see how the Department of Applied Arts is being emptied. Please note how literally everything is being hand-carried. People still did that then. And on the upper left photo, the abundant use of wood wool. I just learned this week that I'm not supposed to say wood wool to Americans. You call it Excelsior, I think. These pictures show how the paintings were removed. And they also were, you either carried something on your head or on your neck. It was, the life was much easier by then. Look at the truck transport. It must be something important being shipped here, because the director is standing here, this man, he is the person who gave the Milkmaid on loan to the US. And also note all the policemen around. It must be something special. Maybe it's the night watch, but I'm not sure. So in September, the option of leaving the paintings in the US became, because of the risks involved of shipping them back to Europe, is mentioned for the first time. A museum in San Francisco puts its finger up and says, well, we can host them for several months because we have extremely mild winters here. And soon other institutions make known that they also are willing to have them for some time. William Valentiner offers to set up a small tour, and from the Netherlands he gets permission for that, but no longer than 6 months, one venue per month. That would soon be ignored, by the way. The first tour starts in November, so after the closing of the fair, and this is where we start, in New York, and we go to Detroit, William Valentiner's home base, and from there on it goes to San Francisco to enjoy the mild winters. And then it goes to the Cleveland Museum of Art, and then it goes to Pittsburgh, Carnegie Institute, and then it travels to the St. Louis Art Museum. By then it's April. The arrows on the map may suggest flights between venues, but of course nothing went by air. Everything was done by train or by truck. Everything in the secure hands of Railway Express Incorporated. This is the kind of material you have to think of, and if you look at that, it's a wonder that we still have the Vermeer anyhow. Unfortunately, after this tour in May 1940, in Europe the situation had gotten a lot worse than the year before. The Netherlands were now occupied territory, and severe battles were fought between the English and the Germans, both in the air and at sea. So no way that the loans could now be transported home safely. Here we see Mr. Walter Peck, art lover, art historian, and famous moustache bearer. We see on the background, we see his own work. And because he spoke fluent French, German, and Spanish, he had functioned as an exhibition director for the World Fair art exhibition. And he now offered to make a new exhibition with all the material that was still in the area. And it was a very ambitious project to go on in New York, but the business case for the project looked a bit risky. So the Dutch didn't feel for it, and once again, Dr. Valentiner was made responsible for organizing a second tour, and once again, Railway Express had to take care of and prepare everything for departure. Yeah, war casualties. Next tour. The tired Milkmaid was still in St. Louis. From there it went to the Minneapolis Museum of Art, and then to the County Museum of Art in Los Angeles, and then to Newark, New Jersey, then to the Toledo Museum of Art, and the Michel and Donald Damour Museum in Springfield, Massachusetts, and on to the Cincinnati Art Museum in Ohio. And from Cincinnati, the paintings went back to Detroit. Finally. When I say the paintings, I mean the Milkmaid and a few others. By this time, several groups of paintings that were once trusted to the organizers of the Masters of Art exhibition had gotten a traveling scheme of their own. And since the quality of the communication with the lenders in Europe became poorer and poorer, it was seldom clear who had given permission for the different venues, who was in charge, whether the artworks were insured, and if so, under which conditions. There were constant rumors about paintings on panel being damaged and from the harsh conditions during the travel. Mr. Valentiner hires William Suhr, a famous restorer from New York, to do a check on the condition of the different groups of paintings. Suhr reports about the Rijksmuseum paintings that they have not shown the slightest change, although we have had considerable trouble with others, especially those on panel. I think that refers to paintings from the Frans Hals Museum, but I'm not sure. We had no paintings on panel there, so, but on the one hand, it's reassuring. On the other hand, it suggests that there were actually things going on. The Dutch government in exile in London gets worried. That much is clear. So they ask Valentiner to keep the paintings in store in Detroit, which he does for almost a year. Apart from the fact that every now and then the paintings appear in the galleries of the Detroit Museum, which is where they shouldn't be because they are not insured. Dr. Valentiner loves the Milkmaid, and it's very hard for him to have such a wonderful painting in storage and not be able to make use of that occasion. But he feels highly responsible for, both as a curator and as one of the organizers of the American tour, that got out of hand. And out of hand it gets when a new player enters the field. In 1941, the Nederlands Informatiebureau, Dutch Information Agency, was established by the Dutch government. Based in New York, the aim of this bureau is to inform both the US government and the American press about the Netherlands in general, in order to gain attention for the difficulties this country was in and its colonies. Immediately, the energetic director of the bureau sees opportunities when he hears about the Milkmaid being in the US, more or less doing nothing. The director of the Rijksmuseum died in May 1941. Dr. Valentiner's objections to other travels can easily be overruled with the reassuring report of the restorer, and the Dutch government in exile is heard but not listened to. Here we see a meeting. On the left hand we see the Dutch Minister of Foreign Affairs, Van Kleffens, during his visit to the US. And on the right, we see the director of the Dutch Information Agency, Mr. Slotemaker de Bruyne. You don't need a degree in psychology to see who is dominant in this encounter. I have looked at this photograph several times, and it was not before the beginning of this week that I saw that the booklet he is confronting the minister with is called The 5 Days of Holland, which painfully refers to the period between May 10th, 1940, when the Germans attacked Holland, and May 15th, when our government had fled to London and the nation had surrendered. This photo makes it completely clear. From this moment on, the Dutch Information Bureau would decide about the further traveling of the Milkmaid and no one else. During the stay in Detroit, there had been one exhibition instigated by this bureau. Strange enough, to Canada, to Montreal, an exhibition called Masterpieces of Painting. But now, another exhibition was set up under the title Great Dutch Masters Exhibition in Aid of Queen Wilhelmina Fund and American Women's Voluntary Services. And it was held in the Duveen Gallery in New York, and after that in Chicago, and then back to Detroit. Luckily, it's a strange word to use in these war circumstances, but luckily, by 1943, the ongoing war needed everybody's attention, and the Milkmaid could finally get a little rest. The constant traveling subsided, but the discussion about the well-being of the painting swells into a roar. It has been mentioned that the Milkmaid needs urgent treatment, which is disputed by others. Opinions and second opinions across each other, and what follows are lots and lots of messages about insurance, costs, responsibilities, and neglect, but in fact, very little happens. We notice that the supposedly sick Milkmaid is sent to the Metropolitan in New York, and from there on to the conservation studio of William Seward. And in October, where he does another condition check and some light treatment. We don't know what the light treatment has been, but he did some light treatment. And in October, it is declared to be in sound condition and does a little excursion to, another little excursion to Chicago and then back again to Detroit. So it's a sort of repetition of the former trip. So, then it becomes 1944 and the end of the war came in sight. And in May 1945, the Netherlands get liberated. Here we see how the Allied forces are just flying over the Rijksmuseum and are being welcomed by the locals. Of course, it was still very unsafe to cross the ocean, and there was a lack of everything in Europe, so ships were needed for other transport. So it won't surprise anyone that it took until the end of 1946 before the conditions were so that the painting could actually travel back. Finally, the Milkmaid's odyssey would come to an end. We don't know exactly how it came from Detroit to New York, but it happened, and from New York it finally goes back home. And with another very brief telegram, this whole story gets finished. It said, "Paintings arrived in perfect conditions. Many thanks." Here, we see the successor of the director that gave the painting on loan, and he is receiving it back from the captain of the USS Adria, seen in the corner. And of course, this goes with some ceremony. And the ceremony was once repeated with the entire crew of the ship, of course. So once again, he receives the painting here. And well, that more or less ends the story of this dramatic trip. It is unclear whether the painting was actually damaged during all this. From the fact that this thorough restoration only took place a few years later, I think that the damage may have been not that enormous. But, well, lessons to be learned is, there are always many lessons to be learned. I think you have to, when you give things on loan, you have to be prepared for everything. It can always take a little longer and have a bit of a different route than what you expect. But another lesson is that it always ends well, And this gathering with the crew ended, of course, yeah, it's also strange. They were at sea all the time, and then they are in Amsterdam, and they were offered a canal boat trip and a visit of the Rijksmuseum. But they also were offered a lunch at the Amstel Hotel. And we see typed that they had lunch for the amount of 12 guilders and 50 cents, which is approximately $6.30. So if you have some spare time, go to the Amstel Hotel and try to have lunch there for this amount. Good luck. And what did they get for their money? This is what they ate. Looks nice. That is the end of this unfortunate story. Merci bien.